Hello and welcome back. This video will compare ridge regression to linear regression. So I just have a couple bullet points here and I'll try to elaborate just a smidgen on them so that you can understand why you might choose one over the other or why one performs differently compared to the other. So again, ridge regression versus linear regression. The first bullet point I have here is that ridge regression is more restrictive and that's because it varies with alpha. This alpha parameter that's introduced into this alpha parameter that's introduced into our model, if as alpha grows, as alpha increases, let's say I set it to 10,000, then it's going to be multiplied times the weight matrix. Remember, the weight matrix is what our model learns. It's a matrix of numbers that is learned based off of the training data. Okay? If alpha is 10,000, and the values of the weight matrix are very large, this entire term is going to blow up. Okay? If this term blows up, it's going to add a huge amount of value or numbers to our predicted value, which can make our error tremendously huge by the time we're ready to compare it to our ground truth value y. Right? And so because alpha is introduced, this adds a new constraint on top of our model such that when we learn these weight matrices, we don't want the values to be too big, because if they're too big, they will make our error very, very large. Okay. The second bullet point I have here is that regularization gives the model additional training, thus allowing more performance gains with a smaller training set. So if we look again at this equation here, we have our weight matrix present in two different locations. Okay? The weight matrix is what's learned based off of the training data. And so if we're given any amount of training data, we will learn it, we'll learn based off of it if we just ignore this term, just box it out, just ignore it for a minute. And we just have our weight matrix times the input data plus some biased value. Let's make this a little bit clearer here. This is linear regression, and we can learn based off of this and this alone. We'll learn a weight matrix, and we'll learn a bias value based off of the input data. That will give us our y predicted value, or y hat predicted value. Okay, but now we introduce this alpha term times the weight matrix again. And as I mentioned earlier, alpha is going to stop W, the weight matrix, from just blowing up way out of proportion. Okay, so certain values of W that are learned in the training process are going to be forbidden, because if those values do arise, in other words, the large values, it's going to blow up this term and cause our error to be very large and make our model perform very poorly. And so not only does our model learn based off of the input data, but it learns based off of this regularization term, thus allowing it to learn more information regardless of how much data that you have. As you see, we introduce this term without actually doing anything with our data. It's present in the exact same capacity that it was previously. And finally, this last term here is that regularization becomes less important with more data. Right? As I just mentioned, you can perform and learn more off of less data with this ridge regression equation, including the alpha value. But as you can imagine, as you introduce more and more data into your machine learning algorithm, then that alpha term is going to matter less, because with so much training data, the information gained off of this term, which really, for being honest, is going to be this term, the amount of information that you can learn with a huge amount of data is going to outweigh whatever you're learning out of your regularization terms. And so in that sense, as data increases, there is a convergence between the prediction accuracy of ridge regression and linear regression. If you have an infinite amount of data available to you, then you can expect ridge regression and linear regression to perform very similar, if not identical. So that is a comparison between ridge regression and linear regression. The more you study and practice with ridge regression and linear regression, you'll learn more about the behaviors. But hopefully this video gives you a brief introduction into why these two are different in the first place and perhaps why you might choose one over the other.